Hi, my name is Sarah Pounders. I'm an education specialist at Kids Gardening. Today, we'd like to share with you a project that we have been working on with our friends at Subpod, and it's a compost guide for educators. And what we've done in this guide is provide you with lesson and activity ideas to help you introduce your young gardeners to composting, to the decomposition cycle, to the issue of food waste and how we can use composting to divert food waste, rebuild soil, and grow food. And the guide is available for download at the website that you'll see here. And I also today would like to share with you a conversation that we had with some of our friends at Subpod, Peter and Katherine. So just to give you a brief background, if you're not familiar with Subpod, Subpod is a composting system that combines vermicomposting, worm composting in an outdoor setting. So the worm bins are actually placed in the soil or in a raised bed and done outside. And it is an easy way to help compost your food scraps, especially if you're in an urban area or don't have a lot of garden space. And so today, Peter is going to share with us a little bit about kind of a broad view of composting. So if you don't know much about composting, you can get kind of an introduction and also a little introduction to how the Subpod works. I hope you will enjoy.
Being here with you. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. Fantastic. And we can all see our heads too. So composting is really like baking a cake. The first time you bake a cake, sorry if you haven't baked a cake out there, but you can apply this to making any type of food if you wish. Making toast might be a bit too simple. But baking a cake. When you bake a cake the first time, it might not turn out that well, but somebody shows you how to do it or you learn a bit about it. Once you've got that cake, it's likely that you can make it every single time. So I like to use that analogy because just like baking a cake, compost requires airflow, moisture, temperature, and the correct amount of ingredients. Now this pile of food waste, I wouldn't call it compost on the left, is what a lot of people see as compost. And it really isn't. I'm sorry to be nitpicky, but you can tell it's too sludgy. So it probably smells, hasn't got enough airflow. I doubt it had the right amount of right balance of ingredients, which I will go into. And because of that, it's just broken down in an anaerobic phase, which means that there's no oxygen there. It's likely releasing methane, sulfuric acids, and other acids as well, which aren't going to be very good for your plants. But there is a way to turn this into this. And what are the 4 principles of all composting? Airflow, moisture, temperature, and the balance of ingredients. Now I'm going to jump into all of those, and we're just going to walk through them one by one. Katherine, Sarah, feel free to jump in here, because I think it's important if we understand these principles, we can take them and apply them to any compost system. So when we think about, airflow.
A recipe. Yeah, sorry, go.
We think about airflow. Life needs oxygen, or in a compost system, it needs oxygen in order for those correct microbes to be able to flourish and grow. So all compost systems need airflow. Sometimes we need to put in that airflow, and depending on the compost system, you will need to bring it in with certain tools. But understanding that you need that oxygen intake will make your compost less likely to smell really. Moisture, same principle. We need to have some moisture in there for the biology to thrive. If you have too much moisture, then this can actually hold things together so the oxygen can't get through. It makes it all sludgy. Just like this picture, when there's too much moisture, it's too wet, oxygen can't get in. So all of these, you'll see these principles all connect with each other. The temperature, just like us, microbes like to be in a comfortable environment. And depending on if you're doing worms or microbes, you really want to have them at from like 20 degrees to, depending on a hot compost system, to 55, 65 degrees. So if you're in a colder environment, which does get in the States, there's ways to insulate your compost system to bring up the temperature. If it's too hot, if it's like a really hot summer's day, then the oxygen is going to get used up really quickly. The moisture is going to get used up really quickly. It could get too dry. So again, temperature impedes on these two. But the most important one is the balance of ingredients. I think this is the most important one because this affects all the other three. And by balance of ingredients, what I'm talking about here is that nitrogen and carbon, there's two parts here to the microbes actually break down two parts in order to make the building blocks of soil, of life. There's more than that, but I'm just kind of really simplifying here. It's nitrogen and carbon. And the nitrogen component, examples are food waste, like your manures, like your fresh leafy greens. And the carbon is, think of anything that comes from a tree. So sawdust, your paper, your leaves, dry leaves. And a mixture of these is really, really important. If you jump online, you can see methods on the carbon to nitrogen ratio, but it will seriously probably give you really a brain aneurysm, will make you feel like it just complicates things. I would suggest just 2 parts carbon to like 1 part nitrogen. So if you're adding food waste, add your food waste and then your carbon, and just applying that will, like having that correct balance of ingredients will allow moisture to go in there, because there's not going to be too much moisture, but it will also allow oxygen to go in there because there's pockets of oxygen of dry and wet, and it will also allow insulation. So balance of ingredients is so important, and most of the time, 90% of the time, people make the mistake of not adding enough carbon. So I think if people just walk away, one thing is add carbon to your compost.
So, and I think as you're providing this overview for us, and I appreciate that you're simplifying it, but I think you're showing the exact reason why y'all's system works so well in schools. Because I have personally, in our own school garden, struggled with maintaining our compost pile. And we had a compost bin, because you do have to have that balance of ingredients. So like if you look at the traditional piles that have been, sometimes you see them in some kind of container, or either some kind of, fence looking material. So like just the most simple like compost pile is all about layering the items and providing all of these different conditions. But it's one of those things where when you, like, I know it was like, wow, I have a lot of carbon right now available to me, or I have, I don't have enough of nitrogen, or I don't have enough food scraps, or either my food scraps are getting eaten by the local critters that are around. Like all these things that you like, it's just an amazing process, because it is all about the microbes. It is living organisms, and just giving them what they need to do their work, right? And so it's really just like the basics of like thinking about those microbes and what they need to survive. But actually in practice, trying to make sure that you have all that balance in a compost pile can be challenging in a school setting. Maintaining the moisture when maybe you're not there every day, especially during the summer when it might get hot and dry and you're not there to keep your compost pile going. Or maybe you have breaks where you don't have, kids available and things there to feed it. So why don't we like move from like the bigger compost picture to really why y'all came up with the Subpod, like how that makes it just so much more accomplishable and easier for school gardeners to really get involved. So maybe
I'm
have a slide that shows this.
So glad you asked. I want to talk about the different types of compost systems first.
Okay.
So you guys get an idea of like what there is out there. But essentially, you'll see that all of these compost systems are above ground. And what makes Subpod unique is that it's underground. And being underground is that it allows that temperature is insulated because, of course, it's surrounded by soil. The moisture can stay in there. And also that balance of ingredients, it's a lot more forgiving.
Yeah.
Forgiving, I would say. So I've got another slide to share a little bit about that, but let's look at the different types of composting. And I love all types of composting. That's why I'm just going to put that out there. I did a challenge earlier this year called the Compost Challenge, where I composted 100 kilos a week. And composting is one of my favorites. That's why I've got this silly photo of me there. because composting creates really good compost in terms of quality. It's one of my favorites. It heats up, the temperature heats up to 55 Celsius, 65 Fahrenheit. So I think that's 100 and
I think it's 130. 130?
130. Yep, that's about it. Around that. And it's great, but you need to have, in order to hot compost, you need to have all the ingredients there on the day. You need to have a pile of 3 cubic meters, and it might take an entire day to layer it up there. It's also exposed to allow airflow, but there are pests can come in as well. So there's different ways you can do it, but usually that's the most common compost pile that people see if you look online. It's just building a huge pile, getting the right ingredients ratio, wetting it down, and then letting it rest. Every month you turn it. So you need to turn it with some like serious tools like a pitchfork usually. And after the 3rd month, you'll get finished compost. But as I said, it's beautiful compost. It's amazing. If you've got the time,
I
the
never
energy.
did it.
Yeah, what's that, Katherine?
And that's why I never went there, because it was too hard. It was too much space. It was just too complicated. Anyway,
It's
sorry.
It's a full day. I've had to.
And the room to have to be able to do it, and as you said, to gather all the ingredients and then to be able to turn it. Oh, forget it. Sorry.
Well, I think a lot of it's about having all the ingredients available to you too, just at one time. So you're there and it's all layered and nice and large, but like, you know, in reality, gardeners don't always have everything all at one time to do that. So you kind of have to piece it together. So.
Totally. That's it. Like if you do not have that size, 3 cubic meters squared, it won't get hot enough. And if it doesn't get hot enough, then you're going into the cold compost realm, which is fine. It just means it's going to take a lot longer for you to achieve that compost. Might take 6 months, might take 12 months. I call cold composting the lazy version of hot composting. And this is the most common method that people use. They have a bin in the backyard and they just throw it in there. If you're doing the right thing, then you're putting carbon in between, and you wait till that bin's full, and you might wait 6 to 12 months. But most people don't put that carbon in between. They end up getting that sludgy mess that I showed in the previous photo. So this is the type of compost system which takes a long time for you to get the finished product. And even when you do, you have to make sure you're using the right tools and aerating it every few months to get that air in there. So that's
the one I'm always scared to open the lid of or go and have a look at, because I'm worried what's going to jump out at me. So that was the one I used to avoid as well. It was in the backyard. And in Australia, we don't just have like, you know, maybe rodents, but you'll have lovely snakes and frogs and all that kind of stuff that will decide that it's a great place to live.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It can be kind of a highly biological area after a few months. And then worm composting. And worm composting is brilliant if you're in an urban environment. It's a small space. These compost worms, as Katherine shared before, they have evolved to eat organic matter, your food scraps, really, really quickly. Every single compost worm can eat their body weight in food waste every single day. If you can imagine if you could do that, that's a lot of food waste. Aristotle called worms the intestines of the earth. They're amazing creatures. So worm composting is all about creating a habitat for these worms to thrive. And what the designs have been for worm composting is these 3 tiers. If you jump online, this is what you'll see, these 3 kind of tiers, and the worms move up the chambers. But the challenge with this system is that because it's above ground, and all these systems, I would say, the above ground factor means that the biology is susceptible to weather conditions, whether it be cold or hot. They don't have that insulation. They need that oxygen, that airflow really isn't there. And then the moisture impacts as well because of the temperature. Another thing is that you have to be really picky with this worm farm. You can't really feed them too much or they die. And they die because it might get too acidic in there. There's no way for them to move. They're kind of a bit of a prison in this. I don't want to say that word, but yeah, they are a bit of a prison in this compost system. So that kind of leads me into Subpod, because worm farms are great and worms are awesome to compost. And if you're in an urban environment, they are the best to go with because they are so quick and they've evolved to eat food scraps. But when you go on above ground, you have those. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, and also add in there, because you mentioned the weather, just the traditional worm composting systems need to be indoors because of
Mm,
the reasons that you've mentioned. So just kind of put that in there too.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's right. Like here in Australia, because it gets so hot, if you leave them in the sun for a hot summer's day, poof, they're dead. So this is Subpod. It's we've designed it over the last 3 years, and the fundamental difference is that it's underground. So we're working with nature. You remember at the start of this presentation, I said, well, what was composting? Well, composting is about getting out of the way of nature and letting it do its work. And by putting it underground, we're actually working in the worms and the microbes habitat. So because they're underground, they're in a damp, dark, and cool environment, which is exactly where they want to be. So they can eat faster and breed faster. These two things, like happy worms and microbes, like you were saying, Sarah, really just makes happy people as well, because the composting is a lot easier. There's no smells with this, there's no mess, and it's really simple and easy to use. The worms themselves that live in there, they travel outside into the surrounding soil. Now, this does two things. Because they can travel outside into the surrounding soil, if you make a boo-boo and put in too much food waste or put in the wrong stuff, don't add the carbon, the worms can leave. They can leave, they can find their food and come back in. So it's more like a cafeteria for them. They can come and go as they please. The second thing it does is that as the worms leave and microbes, they're actually feeding the soil from the root level. So all of these plants around are benefiting from the compost that's being made right here. When you apply compost to plants, you would apply it to the top layer of soil, and it would take some time for those nutrients, those microbes to reach the roots, but they're getting direct access to those nutrients and microbes. And there's so much science now to support the relationships between microbes and plant roots that I won't go into now because that'll be a whole different presentation, but it's a phenomenal partnership that microbes and plants have. And we're actually just giving them a hub with the Subpod and allowing them to access that. And it's giving that circular system. It's going from food waste, soil to growing food all in one simple space.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation, and then I hope you learned something from that background information. If you just wanted to have a thank you to our friends, thank you to our friends at Subpod for taking time to talk with us, and also we just wanted to share with you again where you can locate that guide, and also let you know that our friends at Subpod are extending a 10% discount for educators with the code KidsCompost10. If you have any questions or comments, you can join the chat on the Kids Garden community or on Subpod's Grow Hub community if you specifically have some more questions about Subpod and composting, or feel free to email me at sarahp@kidsgardening.org. We certainly hope that you will start composting, and I hope that you enjoyed learning more today, and we hope to see you again soon.